Hey there. Okay, so this video is for the IGCSE and the O Level Geography. It's for the topic of settlement and urbanisation. So we are going to look at the settlements and service provision, urban settlements, urbanisation, and some of the environmental risks of the economic development. So this is what we're going to look at today. So these are revision notes. You should have covered this in a lot more detail in your classes. This is just revision as a reminder of the main areas that you need to study and you need to know. So we're going to start off by looking at a hierarchy of settlements. So you need to know what this is. So a settlement is a place where people live. A hierarchy puts things in order, and a hierarchy of settlements normally puts settlements in order of size. So we have our hierarchy of settlements pyramid. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got your most rural settlement, which is an isolated dwelling. Okay, and this has a small population, but it's at the bottom of the pyramid with the wide base, which means there are more of them. And as we move up, we've got the hamlet and the village. So the isolated dwelling, the hamlet and the village are rural areas. As we go up, they have got larger populations, but there is less of them. So then we get to the town. Now, towns can be rural or towns can be urban. And then your urban places are your cities, your conurbations, and your capital city. So if we look at the capital city is the largest population. So it has a large population, but there aren't as many of them. It's at the top of the pyramid. So there's not many of them. They're a large population and they are urban. So that is your hierarchy of settlements pyramid. It goes from rural at the bottom to urban at the top. It goes from the small population at the bottom to the large population at the top. And it goes from the large number to the small number at the top. So by that I mean there are more isolated dwellings, more hamlets than there are capital cities and conurbations. So we've had a hierarchy of settlements. We also have a hierarchy of services, and services or functions are anything that's provided in an area or settlement for the population. So services can be goods, they can be businesses, shops, public services, schools, things like this. So small settlements provide a limited range of goods and services. These are services local people need daily, like schools and small shops. We also have what is called a sphere of influence. So this is an area that is served by a settlement. So the sphere of influence of a small village will be very small, but the sphere of influence of a city might be very large, and the sphere of influence of a capital city would be the whole country, would be really, really large. So the sphere of influence, we have some factors. You need to know what these factors are. So your sphere of influence depends on the settlement size and the services it provides, the area's population density, the physical geography, the wealth of people in the area, and the transport facilities that are available, and is there competition from other settlement. For example, if you're in a settlement and there's a nearby settlement that provides similar services, the sphere of influence for your settlement will be smaller because you have that competition. People can go to two places. So those are the factors that you need to know that will affect the sphere of influence. And we also have the threshold population. So this is the minimum number of people which is needed to provide a large enough demand for services. For example, with this one, some companies such as supermarkets will require a minimum population size before they set up a store in a particular area. So services with a small threshold population, such as local shops or primary schools, they're called low order services. There's usually a lot of these, okay? And services with a large threshold population, such as a furniture store or a university, that's a high order service. There's usually a small number of these high order services. So if you compare, for example, a primary school, which is a low order service, with a university, which is a high order service, you've got lots of primary schools, but you haven't got lots of universities. So the high order services, like your university, will usually be found only in larger settlements, and these settlements will also have a large number of low order services within them as well. We also have what is called the range. Now, this is a maximum distance that people are prepared to travel in order to obtain services. So, for example, the local primary school and the university. The local primary school is low order, small threshold, and small range. Okay, people want their local primary school to be local to them, to be close to them. They don't want to travel a long way in order to get to a local primary school. The university at the other end of the scale is high order. It's large threshold and it has a large range. People will travel long distances to go to the university that they want to go to. So that is the range. If you remember the examples of education, the local primary school is a small range because you don't want to travel too far to it. The university is high range, large range, because people will travel a long way to get there. You also will need to know your settlement patterns. Now we've got 3 settlement patterns here. We've got dispersed, we've got linear, and we've got nucleated. And you need to know what all of these mean. So dispersed settlements, these are scattered, isolating dwellings and small hamlets with a few villages. So sometimes you get this pattern where agricultural land is poor and people need to farm large areas. For example, if they're got grazing cattle, it will be very hard for farmers to live in a village and still be within easy travelling distance of their land. Cultural tradition can also play a part where it's not really traditional to live in groups together in villages. And this pattern can be found in some relatively modern settlements, such as on the Canadian prairies, where commercial farms can be huge. Okay, so your next pattern is your linear pattern. So linear as in it's in a line. So you can see that these settlements are along thin rows. Often they're along roads or tracks, or they could be along a river. So this pattern allows each dwelling to have access to a road or a track for transport, and also to an area of farming land at right angles to the road. So physical geography can play a part here. Settlements might be along a river or a line of springs for a good water supply, or along a valley floor, which would avoid steep valley sides. So this is where linear, so it's like going along a line. And then you've got the last one, which is nucleated. So this is where you've got a nucleus. So you've got dwellings that are all clustered together, such as villages. There's not many isolated dwellings, and the shape of the villages is compact, and it's kind of like a square, or it can be a circular shape. So the reasons for this nucleated settlement is that people can enjoy the social benefits of having neighbours and living close to each other. They may have easy access to services like shops and schools. Everything's close together. So being close to others may also be helpful for defense. This would be in if there was in any times of attack, if everybody's close together, they can defend themselves more easily. So this pattern has often developed around areas with rich agriculture, where farmers can live in a village, but they're still near to their fields. And a lot of times culture favours this kind of pattern. People do like to live close together and have neighbours. So those are your three settlement patterns: dispersed, linear, and nucleated. So if you think dispersed is like wide apart, linear along a line, and nucleated is close together. There are several factors which influence the sites and development of rural settlements, and you do need to know these factors. So the first one is the agricultural land use. So most villages came into being as agricultural settlements. So the land use that was used for agriculture is a big factor in influencing rural settlements. Then the next three, you've got altitude, gradient, and aspect. All these together are known as relief. So this is the altitude. So altitude alone is rarely a factor in influencing the site of settlements, but in some areas, like in mountainous regions, for example, the highest areas can be so cold that agriculture is extremely difficult. Like if the mountains are covered with snow for much of the year. Therefore, these areas may be left uninhabited. Gradient is an important factor for the site of settlements. So gentle slopes, you've got the advantage that these are going to be well drained, easy to cultivate, easy to build on. So in the past, those steep slopes have often provided sites because they were easier to defend against enemies. So there are some rural settlements which are on steep slopes, and also aspect. So this is the direction in which a slope faces. It will be an important factor. Some slopes will naturally be warm and sunny. Some slopes will naturally be cold and shaded, depending on where in the world you are and where your slope is facing. And agriculture and settlements do tend to be concentrated on the sunny slopes. Okay, and then the next factor is soil. So areas with fertile soil will be more populated because the land can support a larger population. The land is more productive. So if you've got good soil, you tend to have higher populations. And then we have a water supply. So water supply, many settlements first are established near rivers, springs and wells. You need water for drinking, washing, for crop irrigation. So to actually transport water is a hard and time-consuming job. So settlements tended to pop up where they had their own water supplies. So these are called wet point sites. So that's like a water supply from a river, a spring, or a well. You'd call them wet point sites. And the next factor is drainage and flooding. So very low-lying areas, they might have really fertile soil, but if they flood frequently, that's not an easy place to settle. They also might be permanently waterlogged. So drainage and flooding is also an important factor. And then the last one is accessibility. So even the remotest of settlements do need contact with other settlements to sell produce or to buy goods and services. And this is one reason for the development of the linear settlement patterns along roads or tracks. Now, you will have gone into more detail on these factors in your full lessons. This is just revision, but these are the factors that you do need to be aware of for the sites and development of rural settlements. So now we have urbanisation. Now this is the increase in the percentage of the population living in towns and cities. And urbanisation took place earlier in the richer countries, in the MEDCs, over 200 years ago due to the Industrial Revolution. People left their jobs in agriculture and in rural areas, and they migrated to the growing towns and the cities to work in factories. So this happened kind of 200 years ago in the MEDCs. Now, if you've watched any of the other videos, you do know, and if you don't, I'll let you know now. MEDC is a more economically developed country, and LEDC is a less economically developed country. Okay, so the urbanization in the LEDCs has increased, but since 1950, and that's because there's been like overall population growth, there's been rural to urban migration, there's increasing number of people working in secondary industries, which are now concentrated in urban areas. And the conurbations are when towns and cities grow. They grow outwards and they merge with other towns and cities. It creates something called a conurbation. So one example of this is the world's largest urban area, which is in Japan. It's Tokyo Yokohama, which was formed by the merger of the city Tokyo and the city Yokohama to become the conurbation of Tokyo Yokohama. In Japan, it actually has a population of about 38 million people, and it is the largest conurbation, the largest urban area in the world. In 2020, according to population size, it had 38 million people. So that's a conurbation. To counter this, we've got counter urbanization. So this is the movement where people move from the urban areas back to the rural areas. This is common in many MEDCs, especially the UK. So urbanization in the UK lasted until approximately the 1970s. But then people have started to move from the urban areas back to the rural areas, which is called counter urbanization. So many of these who have moved are relatively wealthy. So they've either retired or they can now commute. So they've either finished work and got savings, or they have like good transport, so they can commute from the rural to the urban areas. And people don't like urban life. There are problems with urban life. Some of these problems can be high housing costs in cities. It's caused people to sell their properties and buy large houses in the rural areas, in the countryside. There's problems in the urban areas with pollution, noise pollution, air pollution, and people would prefer a quieter life in the country, away from the hustle and bustle of more urbanized areas. We do have some factors which influence the size, growth, and the functions of urban settlements. So we've got nodal points, agricultural centres, ports, and administrative towns and cities. So if we have a look at the nodal points, this is a really posh way of saying the route centres. It's where the natural routeways and the natural transport systems they develop into important transport junctions. So they become accessible points in the area, and they're seen to be the best places to provide shops and services such as schools and admin services. So if you are struggling to remember that it's called nodal points, just think of noodles. So if you have a map, all the roads and the main transport routes do look like you've put noodles on the map. So it's quite easy to remember them, that nodal points are the route centres. They're the natural routeways. So that's a main factor that influences where urban settlements are. The other factor we have is the agricultural centres. So some of the towns and cities have grown because they're at the centre of rich agricultural regions, and they become marketing points for produce. So transport links have been built to focus on these areas, and they've developed further into administrative centres where they provide high order services for the surrounding areas. Okay, we've also got ports. So seaports are really quite important in influencing a lot of urban settlements. So seaports obviously is like good transport links for cargo, for business. You have to have like deep water close to the shore where the ships can anchor to unload their cargoes, and ports need shelter from strong winds, rough seas, bays, and river estuaries. So, well, that's provided by bays and river estuaries. So, ports are an influencing factor as well. And then we've got the administrative towns and cities. So, these are the capitals of different regions of the country or the capital of the whole country. So these are usually the towns and the cities where the government and the civil service admins are based, often located centrally. And if it's not located centrally, it's usually located for other strategic regions. So that is your administrative town and city that can influence where you find urban settlements. Our next topic is the urban land use. So we have what's called CBD, which is a central business district. And this has a few features. So the CBD is like the central hub of where business area is. So you tend to find the government buildings, high order retail services, offices, theatres, hotels and restaurants are here. You tend to find the historical buildings here, multi-storey buildings, good transport, public transport links. In the CBD, there's usually fewer residents. So the number of people in the CBD at night is low, and you have zoning. So you find that there's zoning of different functions in different parts of the CBD. This is because certain shops, such as shoe shops, are usually better next to shops of the same type for comparison shopping. So you might have like 3 shoe shops all on the same street and you think, why are they all together? It's better for them because people can comparison shop between them. So they actually see more business. And also businesses like banks and legal services will prefer to be next to each other for ease of just being close to each other for business contacts. You've also got vertical zoning, which is where you sometimes see you've got retailers on the lower floors, but you've got offices on the upper floors. So this is making most use of the available space. And pedestrianised areas. We get high numbers of pedestrians, and we have pedestrianised areas where there are no cars, no transport, or if there is, it's just for delivery only at certain times of the day. So the reasons for the development, why the CBD has developed, really because it was the original core of settlement in an area. It's where people originally came and settled down. So it does contain the oldest buildings, and the town then expands outwards from the central point. It's also a point where roads all converge. So it makes it the area which is most accessible. It's the easiest place for everybody to get to. This in turn makes it pretty desirable for services like retailing to locate themselves in. As a result, the land prices in the CBD become higher, so only certain services can afford to locate there. And then the buildings in the CBD are built taller to make the best use of the land. If there's not that much land and it's pretty expensive, you build stories on top of it. So that is how the CBD has developed. So we have the CBD area. We also have residential areas. These are areas which are, well, residential. It's where people live. So we can have high density housing, low density housing, flats and apartments, shanty houses. So these are the different kinds of residential areas. Now, high density housing is where dwellings are pretty small and there's little or no open space between them. So there's a lot of them all crowded together. It's often found in older parts of towns and cities and close to the centre. Then the low density housing. So this is where you've got fewer dwellings per kilometre squared. There's open space between the housing. There's usually gardens for recreation. And these are usually more modern, and generally they're further away from the city or the town centre. Then we've got flats or apartments. Flats is a very British word. Most people call them apartments worldwide, but these are multi-storey buildings which contain a number of different units. So this can be found in any part of a town or city. You can either get very high quality and expensive, or very low quality and very not expensive. Not always suitable for families with children, but those are flats and apartments. And then we've got shanty towns. So these are, it's like a form of slum housing. So shanty towns are built spontaneously out of anything that's available. So you can build, shanty towns are built out of things like plastic sheets or metal sheets, sometimes even cardboard. And there's a lack of normal services that you would expect in a living area, such as water supply and sewerage. Shanty towns are associated with LEDCs, with the outer areas of cities in the LEDCs, although some can occur in like relatively small settlements that aren't in the outer areas of the cities of LEDCs. And then we also have open spaces in residential areas, which is not listed here, but there are open spaces which are found in most towns and cities. So they're usually planned in MEDCs. They're usually planned, and they're things like public parks, sports grounds, or they may be areas that are waiting for redevelopment. And planning regulations preserve these kinds of spaces so they cannot be built on. And in LEDCs, the open spaces, they're usually developed much more informally. They're not necessarily well-kept areas. So there are open spaces in both MEDCs and LEDCs. So we also have to look at the urban structures in MEDC cities. So urban structure, or it's called urban morphology, is a distribution of different types of land use in a town or a city. So in urban areas, the different types of land use, so we've got the CBD, the housing, the industry, and open space, they usually exist in separate zones. This is because the value or the cost of the land is different. So in CBD, the rents are too high for residential use, and then certain types of land don't mix. So people in high quality housing are not going to want to be living right next to ugly industrial areas. Okay, and then particular types of land. So once it's established that that land is used in that way, it tends to continue in that way. So we can look at, this is Burgess's concentric zone model. So this was developed in 1925. It's based on the structure of Chicago in the USA. And you can see that in Burgess's model, the central business district is the center of everything. So that is the center. And then around there, we've got the factories and the industrial areas. Then moving out, we've got the working class housing areas. Then moving out from there, we've got the middle class housing. And then right on the edge, we have got the commuter zone. Okay, so we've also got Hoyt's sector model. So let's just have a look at that one. So Hoyt's sector model, this one was developed in 1939, and it was more based on transport routes and the idea that certain types of land use do repel other types of land use, which we've already said. But it's more based on the transport routes. So we still have the central business district right in the middle. That doesn't change. Then we've got the factories and the industry. We've got the working class housing, the middle class housing, and the high class housing. So as you can see, we haven't got high class housing or middle class housing next to the factories and the industry. You've got the working class housing, which is closest to the factories and the industry, and the more affluent housing is moved further away from that. Okay, we do have some problems which are associated with the growth of urban areas. So one of these problems is the decline of retailing. So retailing decline. And this is, well, one of the original reasons for the development of the CBD in the first place is that it was more accessible as an urban area for people to congregate. And it's usually, this is no longer the case. We've got increased car ownership, so we've got congestion, we've got slowing down of journey times, including bus journeys, and we've got a lack of parking space. So the first retailers to leave the CBD were the smaller independent shops because they could no longer afford the high rents. And now the larger shops also have started to move out of CBDs just because of the problems of the lack of parking and really expensive land prices. So if more and more shops move out, then fewer people will go to the CBD to shop because there's less shops. More shops will then be forced to leave. There will be a downward spiral of decline, and then people's perception of the CBD may become one that it's a rundown area with empty derelict buildings, it's unsafe, it's dirty, it suffers from litter and graffiti, and people are not going to want to go there anymore. We also have the decentralization of companies and their administration centres. It's the same issue: poor accessibility, poor car parking, high land values. So companies, when they need to change offices, they have realised that, you know what, they can have new purpose-built premises on the outside of town, while the outskirts of town, where land prices are lower, employees can get to work easily and they can park more easily. So especially with communication systems now, many companies and administration centres have moved out of the CBD. So then we've got the evening and the twilight zone. So the evening is where the CBD can be really empty in the evening. The only real services open at that time are bars, restaurants and nightclubs, and it can be seen as an unsafe place at night with high crime rates. And the twilight zone, which has been used to describe problem areas. So this is the transition zone, which is on the edge of the CBD. So this is where you get more problems, derelict land and buildings, high rates of crime and social problems. This is called the twilight zone. So this is another problem of the urban area growth. So there are some solutions to this problem. So we've got a few solutions listed here. We've got pedestrianisation, shopping malls, visual and security. So pedestrianised areas are traffic-free areas where traffic's only allowed access for delivery vehicles at certain times of day. So the reason for this is to create a safe, relaxed environment with less pollution, less air and noise pollution. We also have shopping malls, which are undercover shopping areas. So you can go compare goods and prices. You can ignore the weather. In warm climates, they're air conditioned. In cold climates, they're heated. And shopping malls are generally successful when they're new and purpose built. And they often try to have at least one major store in them called an anchor store, which will encourage other shops to come in and be near that anchor store. So it will contain things like cafes, some small restaurants. The other solution to tackle the problem is visual improvements. So things like flower beds, seated areas, hanging baskets, trees, pavement cafes. And when a building becomes vacant, every effort's made to make it a new tenant occupy, so it doesn't look derelict, it's not left standing empty. And also many cities have street cleaning, litter and refuse collection as their priorities. And you can also see pieces of art, sculptures in important locations in the middle of cities. And the last one is security. Okay, so people need to feel safe in these areas. So this is helped by regular patrols. There's police, or there's many private security firms as well. CCTV, that's a deterrent as well for pickpockets and shoplifters, and it's especially important in the evening. So these are some of the solutions that have been attempted to counteract some of these problems that we find in areas of urban growth.